All right, great. Let's get going here. Once again, my name is Brandon, and this is the Basics of Bookkeeping webinar. I do have a coworker, Michael, with me as well, listening in. He will be paying attention to your guys' questions as we go through the webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar as well for about 15 minutes to go ahead and get get most of your questions answered that we can. If not, you will have support representatives reaching back out to you guys with answers to the remaining questions. So we just want to make sure that we get all your questions answered. At the end of the webinar, there is also going to be a survey that you guys can fill out. We ask you to do that after each of the webinars, just to let us know how we're doing. And yeah, let's get right into it. So first off, I just want to go over the sort of the backbone of your accounting and your bookkeeping within Aplos. So that all starts with your chart of accounts. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. If you go ahead and go to Fund Accounting, Accounts, and then Account List. So this screen, this is going to be the page where you are able to add and remove accounts from your chart of accounts, as well as establish any of your funds. So just a quick overview here. As you can see in the account section down here at the bottom, this is where you are going to be able to click and expand out your accounts depending on the section that you would like to see. So you have your assets or the items in your organization that you own. So this would be, your checking accounts, savings accounts, any type of fixed assets that you might have, as well as any investment accounts. The liability section, these are items that you owe to other organizations. So that includes credit cards, any bills or accounts payables that you might have on file, as well as any loans or mortgages that you might have for buildings or vehicles. Those would all be examples of liabilities. Of course, you have your equity and funds. So these are listed above as well at the top. So these are all of your fund and your fund names. You can also assign colors to each fund, which I'll show you later on in the register where that comes in handy. And then of course you have your income and expense accounts. So your income accounts describing how you are receiving money into your organization, and your expense accounts, which explain how you're spending money for your organization. So once again, you will want to make sure that you have thought through your chart of accounts before going into the bookkeeping side of things, because all of your bookkeeping is going to be based off of these established accounts. Awesome. So the next area that you would want to establish before getting into your bookkeeping, if you plan on using them, these are tags. So tags are another way to track your different transactions that you're entering in within Aplos so that you could run reports off of them. A good example we have here is for fundraisers. So you can see here we have a couple tags that we've created as an example, April fundraiser and COVID-19 fundraiser. So what you could potentially do with these tags is tag any type of income or expense transaction that you might have in regards to one of these tags, so that you can track all the ins and outs of your different fundraisers, or once again, it could be projects, departments, or your own field. And you can run reports then off of these tags. So tags can be useful if you plan on using them, but you do want to make sure that you have those set up before you get started too far into entering in transactions, if you do plan to use tags. All right, great. The next tool I want to point out is the budgeting tool. So budgets are a big part of your monthly, weekly, whatever it might be. You're keeping track of your income and expenses. So to create a budget, you would go ahead and just click this green plus button up at the top right. And then it's going to allow you to set your budget year. So if you wanted to create a budget for 2020, and then it's going to show you the fiscal year that you have established in your settings for your organization. So if it's a middle year convention compared to just a calendar year, you could have a fiscal date here of June 2020 through July of 2021, and you would go ahead and click add, and that's going to start a new budget for you to fill out. So the budget tool is pretty easy to use. You would just go ahead and assign the amount for your 2020 budget that you have discussed, whether it's with your board or have come up with it on your own. You would assign the amounts that you want to budget for your income accounts and your expense accounts. And then you can also show different columns on this page as well if you would like to see some comparisons. So for example, this has some amounts in last year's actuals, which you can compare to your 2020 budget. Or if you check mark off any of these other boxes up top, you can add those columns to the report as well. So that might be pretty useful just to quickly compare numbers while you're entering in your budget. All right, awesome. So that about has to do it with at least the setup process before you get started on entering in your bookkeeping transactions. So once you have your accounts and your tags and your budget ready to go, you can go ahead and start entering in transactions. So that's going to start with one of the places that we can enter in transactions here, which is the registers. So that can be found under fund accounting transactions and then registers. Right. So what your register is going to allow you to do is to enter in transactions directly to your asset and liability accounts if they're set up as a register. So this would be, for instance, your checking accounts, savings accounts. If you have a credit card as well, you can enter in transactions directly to it using the register. So here is the register tool. You go ahead and click add deposit / payment. You can go ahead and fill out the transaction box. You will just want to make sure that you have all the fields with a little asterisk next to them filled out. So if we go through an example here, let's say today I bought some supplies at Costco. So the payee, this is the contact involved in the transaction. This is not necessarily the person who is spending the money or receiving the money. This is strictly just the contact that you had for this transaction. If it was Walmart, the payee would be Walmart if you're spending money there. If you received money from John Doe, John Doe would be the contact in the payee box. But we're going to go ahead and use Costco here. In the comment field, you can add another description if you would like to the transaction, just to describe what it is. So let's just go ahead and say I bought some food at Costco, just a little comment. And then the payment, let's say I spent $100. I know it's a little deceiving here that both the payment and deposit box have asterisks next to them. This is just referring to the fact that you have to put an amount in either or. So if you're spending money, you're going to put an amount in the payment field. If you're receiving money, you would put an amount in the deposit field. If you had a check number involved in this transaction, put in the check number box. The account, so this is going to be either the income or expense account that you would like to use for this transaction to describe how you received or spent money. So let's go ahead and use, here is the 5600 refreshment / foods expense account. In this account box as well, if you're not seeing the drop down of accounts, this is going to list all of your accounts other than your funds from your account list. So if you would like to see this list pop down and want to select from it, you can either click into the account box and click the space bar, and that will give you the drop down, or you can start typing and it's going to narrow down your accounts. So for instance, if I typed in food, there's an expense account called refreshment / food, so I'll go ahead and select that. Then you could select the fund that you're spending the money out of. So let's say that this is just general fund. This is just general food that we're purchasing. It doesn't belong to a specific higher grouping here or fund. So let's go ahead and let's say there's no tag on it as well, but this would be where you would enter in the fundraiser tags that you had previously set up if this was specifically for a fundraiser that you're putting on. Great. So you can submit at this point. The other thing that you can do while entering transactions is you can split a transaction between multiple accounts. So if you go ahead and click the split button, what this will allow you to do is break this transaction out between multiple income accounts if you're receiving money, or expense accounts if you're spending money. So you can add multiple rows and divide this $100 amount between multiple expense accounts. The one thing you do want to make sure is that this payment box is the same as the total between the split amount boxes. So right now, 100% of the total payment is going towards this expense account. But if there were, for example, a portion of this $100 that was for office supplies, then I would go ahead and say, okay, let's say $50 is for food and $50 is for office supplies. So that will in total equal the total payment amount. And if you were off at all with totaling up your split boxes, it will give you a remaining amount here with the difference. So if I accidentally put $25 here, it's letting me know that, hey, you still have $25 that you would need to assign to an expense account. Awesome. So that about does it for entering in deposits and payments into your registers. The next item I want to point out where you can enter in transactions as well is the journal entry screen. So if you're familiar with double entry accounting at all, or have worked in other accounting softwares that use journal entries, this screen should look pretty familiar. Basically, this is going to allow you to enter in debits and credits to the different accounts that you would like to hit. I would say that uh, the way that this tool is most used would be for adjusting entries that you have throughout the year. So if you did have any type of depreciation that you were taking on any of your fixed assets, or needed to accrue any type of income or expenses at a different time than you would record them in the register, then you can go ahead and enter them in as journal entries. And once again, the journal entry screen is going to have fields that you have to fill out based on the asterisk you'll see up in the column. And you can also assign tags to journal entries. So if this was an expense transaction that needed to be assigned to one of the tags that we have created, then I can add a tag to the journal entry lines as well. All right, great. Moving on to the next screen, I want to go ahead and walk through accounts payables. So these would be bills that you have due outside of the month that you are currently in. So as a general rule, accounts payables are usually bills that you have to pay past 30 days of receiving the bill. So this wouldn't be used for your general expenses that you receive or that you spend throughout the week or the month. You know, if you go to Costco and purchase food that, you know, they don't give you a bill to have you pay it at some other time, you would pay right up at the counter. So that would not necessarily be an accounts payable. That would just be a normal transaction. If you did have any bills though that you did have to pay, you know, within a year, or you had to make payments to, then accounts payable will be the screen that you would want to use for that. So from here, you would go ahead and once again fill out the asterisk boxes. Most of this information should be on the actual bills that you receive, such as who you're paying, any memo that you would like to attach to the bill, a reference number if applicable. If not, this will autofill once you submit the accounts payable and just go off of the last reference number. So the one here below is 1003, so the next reference number would be 1004. The bill date, so this would be the date that you received the bill, and then in turn this would also be the date that you would recognize the expense for the bill. If there are any terms on the bill as well, you can select those terms from the terms dropdown. The due date, so when you have to pay off the bill. Amount, so the amount of the bill. And then you can also split accounts payables in the same way that you can split out a register transaction. So you would just go ahead and assign the different expense accounts that pertain to this specific bill, and then you would submit it. Now, once you've submitted a bill, it will pop up under the Pay Bills section down here, and it will list the details that you had entered in for the bill. So the due date, the vendor, the reference number, any comment that you put on the accounts payable. And then this is also where you would go to record payments towards the payable. So in the amount to pay box, you can either pay off the whole balance or a partial balance of the bill. So let's say I was making a $25 payment to the remaining $75 balance. Payment date, so if this is different than today's date, you can go back and change it. And then once you have these two boxes filled out, the Pay Bills button down below will become clickable. So you can either pay bills or pay bills and print checks. So let's say I'm just going to just pay off the $25 portion of it. Now you can see the remaining balance is $50. Now, once a bill is completely paid off, it will show up under the history section down below. We don't have any bills that we've recorded as being paid off all the way, so there's nothing down here right now. But if this bill was paid off all the way, it would pop up down below. Got it. So that's about it for the accounts payable screen. Up just real quick up here, up at the top, you'll see a quick snapshot of the amount that you have due, as well as the time period for which it's overdue. So if it's coming due or overdue, you would see that amount up here up top. Awesome. So the next screen I want to show you is very similar to accounts payable. It would just be the other side of things, and that's going to be the accounts receivable screen here. So this is the flip side of accounts payable. Accounts receivables would be issued if a customer owes you money and you've set the terms of the receivable as far as when they need to pay it back. So once again, this is very similar to the accounts payable screen and the register screen. You just need to fill out the asterisked areas. And you can split out receivables as well. So if you wanted to hit multiple income accounts, you can by adding multiple rows to the invoice. Great. And then once you submit the invoice, it will pop up down under receive payments. And similar to the accounts payable screen, you would enter in either the whole invoice amount or the portion that you received and the date that you received it. And then the receive payment button will become clickable at that point. And from there, you can just receive the payment. You can also print your invoices or email your invoices directly from the screen. And then at the bottom, once again, the receivable, once it's fully received, will pop up down under the history closed fully received section. And you also do get a snapshot up top of what you have due within the next 91 plus days. Awesome. Great. So the last screen I really want to show when it comes to entering in transactions when you're doing your daily or weekly or monthly bookkeeping. And that's going to be bank integration. So with bank integration, this is the ability to link to your bank and have transactions automatically be pulled from your bank into Aplos. So to do that, it's as simple as searching for your financial institution. So let's say I wanted to log into Bank of America. So if I select Bank of America from either end here, go ahead and click it. It's going to just ask you some basic information here, your online ID, your online password. It should be pretty familiar to you guys if you've ever logged in online to your banking at all. It should be the same credentials that you would if you were just to go online. Once you have connected your institution, once again, it will pull in transactions onto this bank integration screen. And from there, you can assign each of those transactions a expense account or income account and a fund, and then tags as well, if applicable. Right now, we don't have any institutions connected here, so I don't have any sample transactions to show you, but this is the screen where you would go if you are using bank integration. Awesome. So another item you guys might be having questions about as far as your bookkeeping needs is payroll. So we do have a direct integration with a payroll provider called Gusto. If you're interested in that at all, you could simply click on the payroll tab up top under fund accounting, and it's going to drop you into the payroll screen, and you can either sign up for a Gusto account or log in if you have one. And basically, this is going to integrate your payroll into Aplos, and it's going to build your payroll journal entry for you and just have you import it. So that is it's a pretty handy tool if you do decide to use Gusto or are curious about what payroll softwares are out there. If you are using another payroll system other than Gusto, you can still enter in your pay runs, whether it's through the register or through the journal entry screen. All right, awesome. So on the accounting end, that about does it for the areas where you would need to enter in transactions from a bookkeeping standpoint. The next section I want to show you is how to enter in contributions that you might receive, whether it's donations or grants, and then how those contributions can be grouped and then linked to the accounting end. So let's go ahead and go there. So if you go to donations and then contributions from the contributions drop down here. So this is gonna be the screen where you would go to enter in all of the individual contributions that you might receive throughout the week and month. So to create a new contribution, you would just go ahead and click the green plus button up here at the top right. Awesome. And so from here, you would fill out the required boxes. So let's say that Brandon Belt donated to, let's say he donated towards the Kung Fu Fund. Now the acknowledge dropdown, this is referencing if you've reached out to your donor to thank them or acknowledge their donation in any way. At this moment, I'm just going to leave it as unacknowledged. Once again, this is an internal tool for you to keep track if you've reached out to your contributors, but I'm going to leave it as unacknowledged for now. Let's say Brandon Belt gave on today's date, so we'll leave that as 4/7. Let's go ahead and say he was generous and gave us $100. If there's any reference ID you would like to attach to this contribution, you can put it in the reference ID box, as well as any note. And then the expense amount box, this is going to be if a portion of the $100 was then taken out, whether it's for online transaction fees, any type of banking fees, any fees that might be taken out of the donation to process it. So let's say there was $5 of this total amount was expensed. And then from here, there is the non-tax deductible amount as well, if it's applicable. So non-tax deductible, this is referencing if they had given any portion of their donation, if any of it went to an exchange of goods or services. So for instance, if Brandon Belt had donated this $100 and let's say 25 of it was for a t-shirt and the remaining 75 was just a pure donation, then you would put $25 into the non-tax deductible amount field, and then you could put a note here as well. Let's say this is a t-shirt sale for $25. So that's just going to show that, hey, this $25 non-tax deductible amount was for a t-shirt sale. Then you can also add a soft credit contact as well to your contribution if necessary. And then once you have your contribution filled out, you can either click on Save and Add, which will allow you to enter in another contribution immediately after, or Save and Close. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Close. So now you can see this contribution has populated based off of the date that it was recorded as being donated. So that was today's date. And now from here, what you can do is create deposits out of the individual contributions that you received and entered. So for example, you might have received 10 different donations throughout the week and from 10 different people. And now you're taking those 10 donations to the bank to make a batch deposit of the total of those 10. So on your contribution screen, you would have those 10 contributions individually created. And then when you're ready to create the batch deposit out of them, all you have to do is check mark off the box next to the contributions that you would like to create a batch out of. And then you're going to go ahead and click Create Deposit. So because we only have the one contribution, I'm just going to use the one contribution as an example to batch up. Once again, you could have 10, 15, you could have 100 different rows made up of 100 different contributions on this single batch, but we're just going to use the one for now. So once you have created your contribution and you decide to create a deposit out of it, it will take you to this screen. And from here, you want to assign a date. So this is the deposit date up top. This is the date that's going to show up on, for instance, your bank statement, or this is the date that you actually went to the bank to deposit the money. And this will also be the date that comes over on the accounting end as well. You can add a deposit batch name. It'll autofill to just contributions deposit if you don't want to change it. This could, for example, be if you wanted to be a little bit more specific and say this was for the April fundraiser, you could put April fundraiser batch up top. It's completely up to you. And now from there, you just want to double check that the rest of the details for the contributions are correct. So you just want to double check the date. And so this date on the left, by the way it differs from the date up top. So the date on the left is going to be the date that the donor gave. And the date up top is going to be the date that you deposited the batch into the bank. So these could be different. Once again, if you were collecting deposits throughout the week, this date at the far left would be different. And then at the end of the week, when you go to deposit those contributions, this would be the date that you made that final deposit. Great. And then from here, once again, you would be able to see the non-tax deductible amount and the expense amount if you had put amounts in those fields on the contribution. And then in order to track it on the accounting side, you would go ahead and enter in which bank account you would like this deposit to be deposited into. So I'm going to leave it as the checking account. An expense account if there's any fees associated with the contribution, and so this would be the expense account that would be hit on the income statement for this $5. So I'm going to leave that as bank fees. And then you can also assign an expense vendor. It's not required, but you could assign a vendor to this $5 expense as well. Just going to go ahead and leave that blank though for now. And then this do not post to accounting checkmark box. You can also check mark this off if this is simply just a donation that you want to record and you don't want it to tie to a deposit on the accounting end. But anyways, once you have the required fields filled out at the bottom, you can go ahead and click on Save. And that's going to create a deposit out of the contributions that you've recorded. So to get to those deposits, that's also under the contributions dropdown. You would just go ahead and click on deposits instead of contributions. And now I want to show you kind of how this contribution links to the accounting end. So to do so, if we go ahead and go to the checking register, let's see here, let me make sure it's in here. Oop. Okay. Doesn't look like it got deposited. Oh, here it is. It's right up here at the top. Okay, great. So on the accounting end, you'll see that this transaction came over as $95 instead of $100. And if you click on it, you can see that that's where that $5 bank fee was taken out. So on the accounting end, you get a net of $95, even though the donor gave $100, they'll still get credit for that $100, other than the non-tax deductible amounts. But on the accounting end, your actual deposit is going to be whatever they gave minus the bank fees. So that's why it's showing $95. If you did want to reference the original deposit, you can always click on the source contribution. So if you click on contributions deposit in blue here, it's just going to take you right back to the contribution screen where you had created the deposit batch. And to get back to the accounting transaction, you can just go ahead and click this accounting transaction link, and it's gonna shoot you back to the accounting side where you can look over the transaction as needed. Awesome. So for donations as well, one thing that we do partner with a organization called WePay, who we do have a direct integration with. If you'd like to sign up for WePay, they process online donations. So as people give, they would process their online donations, and then they just integrate in directly with Aplos. So the steps that we just went over, the creating the contributions, and then creating the deposits out of the contributions, and then depositing those into the onto the accounting side through the checking account. All those steps are automated with the WePay integration. So if you did have an interest in that at all, or aren't currently using a online donations processor, you can always check out WePay by going to the donations and the online donations forms page from the online donations dropdown. And from there, you can sign up for a WePay account. It's free to use. They do have some transaction fees, but other than that, it does make your recording in Aplos a lot simpler from the online donations standpoint. Awesome, great. So once you have all of your transactions, accounting transactions entered in, as well as the donations entered into the system as well, then the next step you want to take is doing a bank reconciliation. So that's going to be back on the accounting end under transactions. It's going to be bank reconciliation. Great. So once you have all of, like I mentioned, all of your accounting transactions and donations entered into the system, you want to do a bank reconciliation to double check that you didn't miss anything for the month. So on this screen, it's going to give you some fields to enter in. One of the fields is going to be the statement ending date. So for this statement that is currently, or this bank rec that's currently active, we have the end of March as the date, and this should match up with your bank statement as well for the checking account for March. And then the statement ending balance, which once again should be on your bank statement. So once you have confirmed that your statement ending date and statement ending balance are matching with your bank statement, you can go ahead and the opening balance as well is automatically generated based off of your past bank recs in Aplos, but you also want to make sure that this opening balance matches with your bank statement before you get started. So once those details are good, go ahead and click OK. And from here, it's pretty straightforward. What you're going to do is you're going to check mark off each of the transactions as they show up on your bank statement. So once again, as I mentioned, this is a double check to make sure that you've entered in everything and that you're not missing any transactions for the month. So you just want to go through, check mark off what appears on your bank statement. At the bottom here, once you've check marked off all of the correct transactions for that month, the difference in red should be 0. And it will allow you to also click the Finish Now button if everything lines up. If not, you can always return to the bank rec by clicking Finish Later. It's going to save what you have check marked off so that you can go back to it later at any point to finish out the bank rec. Awesome. So that about does it for as far as the entry process goes for bookkeeping basics in Aplos. The only other items I wanted to point out is once you do have everything finalized for the month and you're confident in what you've entered in, now you could run reports off of the transactions that you've entered in. So to go to that, you would just go ahead and click on reports up at the top. And this is going to bring you to a screen that houses all of the Aplos reports. You'll see most used reports here. These are your basic financial reports that most of your boards are going to ask for, whether it's on a quarterly or monthly basis. So for these are just the income statement, balance sheet, and budget. As you go down, there's some tag-based reports if you are using tags. And the other reports, there's some other more specific reports that you might use for one-off reasons, such as an aged payables report if you wanted to see all the payables you have outstanding currently. And then there's the donation reports down here. These are going to be really useful for checking on how much you've received throughout the period for the donations that you've received, as well as double checking that you've entered in all the donations for all of your donors. And then you can also, using the donations by contact and donations by household report, you can print contribution statements and send those out to your donors as well. Awesome. So a quick tutorial on just how to use any of these reports. We'll take the income statement, for example. All the reports are going to have a date range for you to set for the report. It's going to have some report filters if you wanted to adjust the report to only show, for instance, for the income statement, if you only wanted to show a specific fund, you could select that fund. And then the report layout, these are just going to add some additional columns to the report. So if you wanted to see the annual budget as well on this same report, as well as some different display options here as well. So once you have those all ready to go, you just go ahead and click apply, and that's going to reflect on your report here. Awesome. So yeah, that about does it for reports. Let me go ahead and make sure. Okay, great. So nothing else really here on reports. These reports are going to be used on an as needed basis, but they are here once you have all your correct bookkeeping transactions entered in. Awesome. So some final tools I just wanted to show you before we get into the question and answering session is going to be the period close. So under fund accounting, there is a period close tab here. What period close will allow you to do is similar to bank rec, the bank reconciliation process of kind of finalizing transactions. A period close will allow you to finalize your books for a specific time range. So, and it will lock it down in Aplos so that no one can make changes prior to the date that you enter into the period date here. So if you entered in today's date, that means that any transaction entered in prior to today's date would be locked down, and it would not allow anyone to go back and change those transactions. So the other feature I wanted to point out as well is we do offer e-filing if you did want to use us to process your 990s. So you can go ahead and choose a page from this e-file dropdown, whether it's starting a new filing or an in-progress filing that you want to continue with. You can go ahead and go to the in-progress page, or if you filed with us before, under your history tab here, it will list all of the 990s that you have filed with us. All right, great guys. That about does it for the Bookkeeping Basics webinar. Now we're going to go into some questions and answers. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a minute or two to write in your questions. And between myself and my coworker Michael, we'll go ahead and try to get some of those answered for you within the next 15 minutes. And then any other questions that you have past that point, like I said, there will be some support representatives to reach out to you guys to get those answered. Once again, as well, there is a survey at the end, the very end, that you guys will get a chance to fill out. Go ahead and do that as you can. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself for just a second and let you guys write in some answers. All right, we got a good question here from Scott. He asks, in regards to the WePay integration, they have mostly recurring online donations, and then how does that look when integrated with Aplos? So with WePay, you're actually able, if you see here from the online donations dropdown, if you are using WePay and you do have recurring donations, you can see those listed here on the recurring donations page. It's going to show you all the donors that are currently recurring donors. But what WePay will also allow you to do, and will allow your donors to do, is if they do donate through WePay, it's going to set up what we call a My Aplos account for all of your donors, where they can go in and either set themselves up as recurring donors, manage their recurring donations, or cancel a recurring donation as well if they're currently recurring donors that would like to not be anymore. So Scott, there are a couple different options for if you are using WePay to view those recurring donors and to manage those donations. And as far as the accounting side goes, I mean, they're just going to come over as deposits in the amounts that they would, whether they're a recurring donor through WePay or through another source. So good question, Scott. So Jen has a good question here. Her question is, could you edit comments, accounts, or funds once locked, or is everything locked? So when it comes to using period close here, this will lock down everything about the transactions that you have entered in. So that includes comments, accounts, or funds. Once the period has been locked in, those fields are also locked down as well. If you have just done a bank reconciliation, depending on what you would like to change on the transaction, there are still fields that you can edit. So the comment field is one of them. The account field can be changed depending on if you're switching between like expense accounts or income accounts, that can be changed. And as well as the funds, those can also be changed as long as you're not changing the amount or the date on the transactions. You can still change certain fields even if you've reconciled those transactions. But period close, that locks down everything. All right, good question, Jen. All right, Susan here has a great question as well. When it comes to what we in our system call fund transfers. So as she brought up, if you have accidentally booked a transaction to the wrong fund, or have been entering in amounts to the incorrect fund as you went along, or you were simply wanting to just transfer amounts from one fund to another, we do have a tool, and that's within the journal entry screen. That's it's called Start New Fund Transfer. So if you go ahead and click that, this screen is going to walk you through the different fields that need to be filled out in order to make that fund transfer. So for the fund transfers, you will enter in a memo. So you can put simply just fund transfer here if you would like. The date of the transfer. So if that was today's date, you can leave that as today's date. It's going to ask you within which asset or liability account you are transferring this amount. So once again, it's not going to change the value of the asset or liability itself. It's just going to transfer the fund amount that you select within that account. So if we select checking here, the fund amounts will be transferred within the checking account. How much you want to transfer, and then it's going to ask you the source fund and the target fund. So for example, if we were to transfer $100 here, and let's say it was originally recorded to the general fund, but now we want to allocate this money out to the children's fund, then we would select the children's fund as the target fund and general fund as the source fund, and then go ahead and click transfer. So good question, Susan. Let's go ahead and answer a couple more here. All right, great. Scott here brings up a good point. So his question is, if I have the bank integrated as well, then will I be able to basically match the bank deposit with the recurring donations that Aplos pulls in from WePay? So I think that's a good point to hit on. Maybe not just in Scott's case, but with anybody using bank integration and donations. So what you will see is that you will have transactions, mainly deposits, that you are entering in both on the donation side, but are also still coming in through bank integration, because bank integration is going to pull all the transactions from your online banking. That would include the deposits that you've made that include contributions. So in order to do so, what we have on the bank integration screen, which once again, I apologize, we don't have a connected bank currently, so I'm not able to show you a live example, but there is going to be a hide button at the far right for transactions that could potentially be duplicates. So that would be a good case for, I think donations are the main case that comes up with. You know, you've already entered in your deposit, you've already linked it to the accounting side, and then now it's coming up again on the bank integration screen. So from there, I would just recommend hiding any transactions that you've already entered in, whether it's through donations or if you've entered in any checks or anything on into the register itself that is popping up again for bank integration. That the hide feature is useful for those transactions. So good point there, Scott. All right, Donna here has a great question as well. So her question was, how do you account for transfers between your checking and savings and then back from savings to checking? So that's a great question. To do so, I would do these transfers in the register. So let's say, for example, I was wanting to transfer money from the checking account to the savings account. So it's as simple as entering in a normal transaction. You'd go ahead and put the date of the transfer. So let's use today's date. The payee, typically I just use a payee that's labeled transfer or online transfer, whatever it might be. It can also be the bank's name as the payee. It's up to you. Any type of comment. And then let's say this was money from the checking account to the savings account. Say I'm transferring $50. And let's say this is coming out of the general fund as well. I'm just transferring general fund money from the checking to the savings. So if you wanted it to go to the savings, that's going to be the account that you select, and vice versa. So if this is the savings account I'm transferring money to, I would select the savings, and then I would go ahead and click submit. So you can see now that savings transaction is under the transaction history, and you can see that it's transferring to the savings account. So if I were to go to the savings register, that transaction will also pop up here. So to do the reverse, to transfer money from the savings to the checking, you would do the same thing, just once again flip-flopped. So you would choose the checking account as the account you would like to transfer money to. And then from there, as long as that's the target account or account that the money's being pulled from, it's going to make the transfer. So good question there. I'll go ahead and answer one or two more questions, and then, as I mentioned, any remaining questions will still get answered, just not over the webinar. All right, we have another good question here. The question is if I pay an amount every month, but it is not really an expense as I get credited back the money at the end of the month, how could I document it without it looking like an income or expense? So that's a great question. Typically, the way those types of transactions are handled, they're either handled using some type of asset account, so some type of receivable account where once you spend the money, if you know you're going to get it reimbursed, you would just increase that specific asset account. And then once you receive that money, you would decrease that asset account. So in your register, you would select that asset account on the original transaction where you spent the money. And then once you receive it back, you would also use that same asset account. That's one way to handle it. The other way that's typically done with reimbursement type transactions, and this could be whether it's a refund on an item that you purchased, or you are refunding somebody else. For the original transaction, you would go ahead and hit an expense account or income account for the original transaction. And then once you reimburse the money back, or you are reimbursed the money that you originally paid, you would use that same income or expense account for the second transaction. So in a sense, it's going to increase an expense account temporarily and then zero it back out. So I know I've seen orgs use a reimbursement expense account for that scenario, or a reimbursement income account that at the end of the month it shows a $0 amount. But if it doesn't show a $0 amount, at least you would know how much you're going to get reimbursed for in the future. Once again, that's up to you guys on how you want to handle that, but there are a couple different ways to go about it. So good question there, Jen. I think that about takes up our time for the webinar. This is being recorded, and I believe a couple hours after the end of it, you will be sent a link to the video for it as well. So if you missed anything or wanted to go back over any items, you can always look back over those. I wanted to thank Michael for being here as well. He did great with answering all these questions. And yeah, if you guys could just go ahead and fill out that survey at the end, that would be great. It just gives us some feedback on how we're doing. And any other questions that you guys have, we're gonna make sure we get those answered. So thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it, and you guys all stay safe and have great days and great rest of your weeks. See ya.